greatest public servants we've seen in Peel region. It was Hazel McCallion, who radiated hard work, and Bill Davis, who was the embodiment of decency and collaboration. And I just don't see those attributes in Bonnie.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Radical Center. We are so excited to be here today, and we have a very, very special guest with us today. We are extra excited that we have the Mayor of Brampton here with us, Patrick Brown. Thank you for your time. Let's get right to it, Patrick. Let's talk a little bit about Brampton. You're the Mayor of Brampton. We know you love Brampton. You talk about Brampton every second of the day, at least, every time I see you talking about anything, it's always about Brampton. We appreciate that. What do you think are the biggest challenges facing Brampton leading up to the provincial and, eventually federal elections that are coming up?
Well, let me say, first of all, how novel I think this idea is, getting Cody Vatcher and Nokha together, a disenchanted liberal, a frustrated conservative, to embrace the radical center. And I've taken note of your discussion, and I think it's great. I think in a democracy, you need to have more discussion, and it's great to have something like this. So glad we have this platform in our backyard. In terms of Brampton, our I think greatest challenges right now, there's a number of them. Growth is a huge pressure. 45,000 new residents a year, fastest growth in the country. Growth comes with pain. We've got basement apartments that are out of control, crowded housing conditions that are a challenge. It puts a pressure on the education system, healthcare, not to mention transit. And so we deal with that. We're happy to be a destination for so many, but it's part of the challenges we have to embrace every day. And I would say organized crime is becoming more complicated in Canada over the last number of years. If you look at the increase in domestic violence calls, auto thefts, extortions, this is something that I think we grapple with as a big city. And I think a lot of big cities are grappling with it as well.
Yeah, and that makes sense for sure. And as a growing city, you're going to, have more and more complex needs. You decided to get involved in this this ongoing provincial election. And you decided to endorse a particular party and a particular candidate for premier, the current premier, Doug Ford. What made you decide first to get involved, and why Doug Ford?
I think my inclination was to not get involved. I view municipal politics as nonpartisan. I have to work with all parties. Right now, we have a very good relationship with the Government of Canada, which happens to be Liberal, and we have a good relationship at Queen's Park, which happens to be Progressive Conservative. For me, there was a number of factors of why I decided to endorse the PC team in this election. One, we had some pretty big asks. Before my time as mayor, the funding coming to Brampton was very minimal. What we've seen the last number of years is beyond extraordinary. If you look at the LRT underground tunnel, if you look at the second hospital, the cancer care center, the med school, we're seeing provincial investment literally around 20 times the rate that we saw in any previous period. And those projects are pivotal for Brampton's development. So I want to keep a good thing going. We've got a very productive and collaborative relationship. Having the transport minister, Prab Sakaria, in Brampton South is the stars have been aligned. Having the health minister in the riding adjacent to us in Sylvia Jones, once again the stars being aligned. And so these projects are underway, but they're not completed yet. And so I'd like to see this relationship continue, and I believe it'll be beneficial to the residents of Brampton who I work for. I'd also say one of the differences for me this election is also who the alternative is. I've worked with Bonnie Crombie on regional council. I found her derogatory, combative, and nasty towards Brampton. It had me very worried what would ever happen if she was premier. We saw in the regional dissolution, she tried to essentially steal funds from Brampton, taking away, saying that they didn't have to pay for any repayment for what Brampton put into regional infrastructure that was in Mississauga, something that even Hazel McCallion would have never contemplated. She always said you got to treat everyone fairly. I had a real run-in with Mayor Crombie when she was there on police funding, where she felt we could freeze the number of new officers. We had disagreements on Bill 21. She tried to block my efforts to challenge Bill 21, which I thought was an attack on a foundational principle in Canada that protected religious freedom. And so I just disagree with her politics. And I don't believe she was the best person to lead the Liberal Party of Ontario. And I think this election will likely reflect that.
Mm-hmm. You brought up the leader of the Liberal Party, Bonnie Crombie. She was recently caught on tape saying, "quote I don't go to anything in Brampton. It's not my city. I don't care." How do you respond to something like that when you hear it? I mean, we all heard the tape. It was all over. It was all over Twitter. Some bigger news organizations carried it as well. How do you respond when you hear something being said about your city in that way?
Well, I think people that know Bonnie Crombie best are not surprised. And comments came out yesterday where she said something similar towards Scarborough. Uh, I love Brampton. I love Canada. I love Peel Region. I think we're a beautiful place that just radiates talent. And everything from this captain of Canada's soccer team and Atiba Hutchins to Tyler Seguin winning the Stanley Cup to Alessa Cara. This is just a city that has talent. It's a part of the world that has talent. And I always felt that I looked at her as someone that wanted to be elsewhere. As soon as she could get away to the family compound in the Hamptons, she wanted to. It wasn't, I want someone as premier who loves every aspect of Ontario, that loves every city, that will live, breathe, and sleep trying to better this province. I don't want someone that dreads going to any corner of the province.
Yeah, and some of these comments have been pretty hurtful. I can imagine they would be hurtful to a lot of Brampton residents, Scarborough residents. You know the region very well, and you're also known to be a fairly very good politician, I would say. Also a good organizer, someone who understands elections and what it takes to win. What do you think? Because we all know the region of Peel is the key to winning an election. So if you're going to do well provincially, especially, you have to win these seats. What do you think Bonnie's biggest challenge is when it comes to winning seats in Mississauga and Brampton as well?
Well, I think that's for liberal strategists to dissect. I just feel there are complications in this region that comes with growth, that comes with the mosaic that we are, and I think what this region really needs is someone that will have an open ear to our concerns, that will not dismiss any part of Peel region, that will be fair, equitable. And when I look at, in my opinion, the greatest public servants we've seen in Peel region, it was Hazel McCallion, who radiated hard work, and Bill Davis, who was the embodiment of decency and collaboration. And I just don't see those attributes in Bonnie. And I look at the crises that we've faced, and we've had many in this area. During COVID, it was a challenging time. I look at the asylum claimant crisis that we went through, and I always felt that she was more concerned about ruffling feathers rather than speaking up and saying what is right. I got into a disagreement with her when I wanted to have a press conference outside of our Dundas shelter, where we had two asylum claimants that lost their lives. Outside, it was at full capacity, 400% capacity, and she was more concerned about offending other levels of government than bringing attention to an issue that needed attention. And I think in Peel Region, we want to see a government that will work, that will roll up their sleeves and work and listen to us. I don't think there's anything necessarily glitzy or complicated about it. Just be fair to us.
And that makes sense. Cody, do you have any?
Yeah, I would just the one thing that I want to say that's I think is important to get on the record when it comes to why I think Mayor Brown endorsed the Ontario PC party. Number one, he pretty much built that party to what it is today, so he gets the credit for a lot of that, to be honest. The second thing is, and I mentioned this on Twitter a few days ago, is that between Patrick Brown and Doug Ford, nobody has taken the time and made the types of investments into Brampton that those two have.
Having said that, I'm not going to agree on everything that the current PC government says. I'm not going to agree on everything that the Liberal government in Ottawa says. But I would just find we've got a great relationship right now on a number of key files. For that reason, I want to keep that success going.
And you have done a great job we have to be honest about the investments that are flowing to Brampton. We're seeing that, right? So it's completely understandable that you would want that to continue and you wouldn't want that to be interrupted. Going back to Brampton residents specifically, we all know that voters vote on a particular issue. What do you think if you were to think of the average Brampton resident? Why are they going out to vote this time?
So I find the biggest issues in Brampton are public safety and healthcare. And so not all of these fall within the matrix of a provincial election. I think on healthcare, the government has a strong message to say that we're doing the groundbreaking on the second hospital on March 28th. We're advancing the regional cancer care project and we're opening the med school in September, all transformative projects for the city. So I think on healthcare, they've got a strong message. On public safety, they did give us the double cohort this year, which allows us to hire more officers and do some of the catch up that I believe is necessary. A lot of the federal issues are more interconnected with public safety, criminal code, bail reform. Those all fall on a federal level. So I think if I'm a voter going to the polls in Brampton, the issues that I care most about, the PCs probably have a better understanding of Brampton's needs on those issues.
Okay, let's switch gears a little bit, unless Cody, you have anything you'd like to add about the provincial election. That's wonderful. So let's talk a little bit about Donald Trump. He's been making a lot of noise, as he enjoys doing. Sometimes I wonder if everybody just stopped giving him attention, if he would just stop and maybe just do a proper job as president. But he's talking a lot about tariffs. How do you think Brampton would be impacted if these tariffs actually come to life?
Well, I think it would be devastating. We have so many businesses that export to the US. I look what's happened sort of to, now you're frustrated with the current liberal movement. I'm frustrated with the incarnations of the modern conservative movement. I look what's happened to the Republican Party in the US and how far it's moved away from George Bush Sr. or Ronald Reagan that were proud free traders. I think that the evolution of Canada's friendship with the United States. You look at Brian Mulroney and Ronald Reagan, who advanced free trade, and it was very successful for both countries. To see Donald Trump run away from that and to cancel an agreement that has really supported economic development in both countries is worrisome. Part of the bigger worry is that he's an individual that is impossible to predict. So I'm glad we have a 30-day reprieve, and he's focused on other international issues right now, but I would hope that he would value Canada as a long-standing friend and the best geographical neighbor you could have. I just worry that right now in Washington, D.C., there's inadequate understanding of the issues. The example of fentanyl. There is a fentanyl issue globally, but when I look at synthetic fentanyl labs in Canada, it comes from Mexico and China. If you look at in the US, 99.9% of the fentanyl in the US comes from Mexico. And so the fact that they would target Canada on fentanyl is just inconsistent with the facts that are available.
The Prime Minister today, I think, or was it the day before? But anyway, he said that Donald Trump is actually serious about Canada becoming the first state. I have my Canada's not for sale hat right here. But what do you think? Do you think he's serious? Do you think this is something we need to worry about? Are we going to go into war here? Like, well, should we be freaking out? What's going on, Patrick, on that?
Yeah, I think he has a mistaken belief that Canadians would welcome becoming the 51st state. That is obviously incorrect. Canadians are fiercely proud of our country, and there would be negligible public support for that. And I think we've seen in polls the vast majority of Canadians find that notion completely repugnant. But it's not just Canada he's making comments like that towards. There's other areas that he's more recently, everything from Gaza to Greenland. And so I hope this is just banter. I do not take it seriously. Originally when I heard about it, I had spoken to the public safety minister and the prime minister about it, and they thought it was simply him making jokes. But the fact that joke keeps on happening is alarming, and I think it's got to the point that Canadians don't find it funny.
Look, we've talked about this many, many times on the podcast, and I'm very passionate about this tariff issue. And I got a lot of messages this week about people who have been watching, and they've messaged me privately. And, I privately bet somebody this week that there would be no tariffs, at least this week. And I was right. So now somebody owes me a little bit of money. But whether you like it or not, this is his debating and his negotiating tactics. He drops a bombshell maximalist position, 99 out of 100, knowing full well that he's only going to get 55 out of 100. But if he gets 75 out of 100, that's still a win. And the reason why this position works for him is, he doesn't say something and actually mean what he says at the beginning. It's a maximalist position as a leverage point. He may mean it, he may not mean it. It's the guesswork that makes this position work. And if you don't understand that about Trump, then it's going to be a long 4 years ahead of them. And the other thing that I would say is when it comes to, executing his agenda and speaking of tactics, the breakneck speed in which he is enacting his agenda is a lot like Rock'em Sock'em Robots, right? The game from back in the day, right? He throws a hand grenade into a room. He just listed off a few: Canada's not for sale, Greenland, the Gaza thing. And while we're all focused on the trade war, he's really trying to get his controversial nominees through, and he's firing half of the federal workforce. The other thing that I think that disadvantages us is that the resistance from Trump 1.0 is not there anymore. The Democrats are still failing to find their footing after the election. And during the previous trade negotiations, that resistance was Democrat politicians, voters, and all the rest. But this time, there is no resistance, and it's not coordinated.
He has a stronger hold on Congress, the Supreme Court. He has a stronger hold on the Republican Party. Some of the opposition he faced is clearly on the sidelines now, and so I do think it's a greater threat for Canada. I like Cody believes that some of these more surprising comments, infuriating comments, are a negotiating tactic. But I also believe that he's someone that if you give an inch, he'll take it. And it's why, we have to be aggressive in how we handle these negotiations. He will prey on weakness.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. That's a great assessment. Let's move a little bit to federal politics and talk about the new prime minister. Our prime minister has resigned, or he's on his way out. There's a leadership race happening in the Liberal Party, so exciting. We kind of all know who's probably going to win, but we won't put you on the spot and talk to you about that. We're not going to put Patrick on the spot and have him comment on liberal inside liberal politics, but there will be a new prime minister. What do you think is your biggest ask for Brampton this year? And there might be another new prime minister in just a few months after that. So what would you be advocating at the federal level for Brampton?
Well, I think with a new prime minister, you sort of have a blank slate in terms of the ability to restart projects that might have been stalled before. There's a number of projects that we can work on. Right now, we do have federal involvement in a number of key files. We have a number of big infrastructure projects. I was with the prime minister on Thursday, and we've got one more announcement coming before he leaves office. So I have to be careful not to let that one out of the bag. But yeah, that news is coming, but I and will be achieved before the new prime minister starts. But I would say there are other projects that I'm going to raise with the new prime minister. Right now, we've got container scanners at both intermodal hubs. We probably need additional ones. The ones we have now have made a big difference, but we're not catching everything in terms of our battle against auto theft. I have petitioned for bail reform for the last 4 years, ever since we had the Henderson Bellman tragedy, instance where someone lost her life from someone that was released on bail for the fifth time. I think for public safety in Brampton, we need bail reform. We need to take property crimes more seriously. And so that's something that I love to have a fresh conversation with the government of Canada on. I feel on a number of files we've had success, but I think on some of the criminal justice components, it's moved too slowly. I think would be the kind way to describe it.
Okay, and I think that's fair. Do you think there's been any movement on auto thefts in terms of, have things improved?
They have improved. It used to be the easiest country in the world to get stolen goods out of. It was via our intermodal hubs and via the Port of Montreal. And I would say Dominic LeBlanc was very effective as public safety minister. We got those scanners first in the country. They're operational now. We asked for 4, we got 2, and so that has been helpful. We haven't fixed bail reform. Property crimes, for property crimes, whether you steal a giant gold heist or steal a car, you're not going into custody. And so organized crime has sort of viewed it as the severity, the punishment is so weak that it's worth the risk. And so we can do more in combating auto theft, and hopefully that will start. But we've definitely made progress. The rates are going down. And yeah, that's part of the conversations I would love to renew.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about housing in Brampton. There's a housing crisis going on, across the GTA. How are things going in Brampton? What are some things that you think you need help with or support with in terms of increasing the supply of housing in Brampton?
So we are growing fast. In some cities where there's not new housing being constructed, that's not the case here. But because of the pace of growth, even the fact we've seen significant new housing, it's not kept up with the pace of growth. I think there's 2 sort of positive aspects of this on the horizon. One, the government is fixing the international student program. It was out of control. And we had 100,000 international students in Brampton with no plan for housing. That is now changed. And so we're going to have a reasonable number of international students. It's going to be linked to employment and education. And so I think that is going to make a big difference. Now, Mark Miller, the federal immigration minister, has actually been very helpful to some of these issues in Brampton. He helped us solve the asylum claimant crisis, and he's helping us solve the international student crisis. He's someone that probably deserves more credit than he gets as a valuable member of cabinet. But in terms of housing, the servicing costs are significant. And so, if we're going to meet the provincial growth targets, just to have the wastewater capacity is something that will really test Peel's limits. So, it's not cheap to build new housing. And I know everyone thinks there's a magic bullet out there. There are many tools in the toolkit. And whether it's interest rates, whether it's the accessibility of construction workers and the skilled trades, there are a number of factors that have made housing prices so expensive in Canada. And none of them are going to be solved overnight, no matter who is in government in Ottawa.
Yeah, that's for sure. And you hear so much from Pierre Poilievre talking about housing, and you makes you think that he's got the magic button that he's going to fix the housing crisis. But
Yeah.
nope, you're right.
And,
Nope.
and and I think it's dangerous to set expectations too high. And so I think some people believe, oh, if there's a change in government, housing prices are going to go down. I've got news for you that they're not going down. If you look at housing prices decade over decade, they continue to increase. And if you look at cities like New York and London that had challenges with growth and available developable land, housing prices became more and more unaffordable. And I don't want to accept that as a reality, but I do not think it's as simple as saying we're going to take away your federal funding for transit if you don't build housing. Canceling transit routes will not get housing built.
Yeah, I also agree with what you said about Mark Miller. I certainly believe that he doesn't get enough credit for the job that he does. There is no simple answer to any of these. Um, Going back to the provincial election, Bonnie Crombie is talking a lot about family doctors, and she's going to fix the healthcare problem by making sure every Ontarian has a family doctor in 4 years. Do you think that's something that would resonate in Brampton specifically, given the fact that healthcare is top of mind for everyone, and it is hard to access primary care, not just in Brampton, in many areas of the province?
Well, I think it's easy to say you want to have more family doctors. Who wouldn't want to have more family doctors? But what's the plan? I have to say this conservative government right now is opening 2 medical schools.
Mhm.
The York Medical School and the one we have coming in Brampton will graduate more family doctors than have ever been graduated in Ontario before. And I remember when I was petitioning to get that medical school open in Brampton, she thought it was preposterous. And so I know there's this newfound interest in having more medical school capacity in Ontario, but I have yet to hear how she's going to do that. Uh, it just, I guess I'm more skeptical when this interest appears, during an election period.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I think personally, as somebody who worked in healthcare, I don't think the only solutions are, get more doctors. Of course, you want to get more doctors, but there's a lot of creative solutions that nobody's really exploring. But I guess I also understand that during an election period, you want to use the word doctor because that's going to get you attention, but it is
Yeah,
what it
and
is.
my sense, I think voters just want you to be real and honest and transparent. And it's easy to make a lot of promises, but if there's not a plan for how to pay for them or how that promise is going to be achieved, I think you leave voters skeptical.
Yeah, I agree. Go ahead, Cody.
Yeah, and I think healthcare is a tricky thing because it's one of those issues that it's an across the country issue. Like I know that I have family in rural Newfoundland. It seems like they have a new family doctor every 5 days, right? But when it comes to the Ontario PC government, um, they don't just get out there and throw money at the issue. The new medical university in Brampton is gonna train future doctors, right? That's an actual plan. The other thing that I would say too is that I remember one of the last healthcare announcements that the Wynne government did back in I think it was 2017 or 2018. They came to Brampton and they announced a few extra beds at Peel Memorial Hospital. And the city, Linda Jeffrey and some of the councillors that still sit on council today, they rolled out the red carpet for that. And I thought that was disgusting.
We have an aging population. Our healthcare budget is growing faster than we have fiscal capacity to contain. And so, what are we doing to do more outside the hospital? What are we doing to creatively make this healthcare system work for Ontario? And I think there's a real push right now to do more outside of the hospital that is helpful. I would note that the nature of the new medical school is focused not necessarily on more specialties. There is 16 specialties that are taught at this medical school, but the primary focus is family doctors, knowing that's where the most acute shortage is in Ontario. And Cody, you make a good point about that previous announcement. It was essentially going to build a glorified $300 million urgent care clinic. What we're getting now is a $2.3 billion proper hospital with an emergency department, with a focus on youth mental health, on a focus on dementia, a proper hospital. And I think that's why Ford can be a little more confident on healthcare, because he's got a better track record to speak about. I think all political parties in Ontario bear responsibility for the situation we're in today. But I think in terms of Brampton, the government has seen tangible progress that was not the case before.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. I want to ask you quickly about the region of Peel. There was this big breakup. It was called the divorce that was supposed to happen. It was all over the news. Maybe, tell us a little bit about what's happening with that now. Where are things at? Is the divorce off? Are they back together? We don't have to get into too much of the
Yeah.
details, but for our listeners who may be wondering what's the status of the
I
relationship.
think the status is right now we're trying to focus on the areas the region does best and keep it there, and the areas that there's duplication in, strip that out of the region. So planning, there's duplication. We don't need to have a planning department at the region. We have planning departments locally. We do not have police departments locally. We do not have paramedics locally. Those are regional services, and let's make sure we do them well. And so that's the current approach right now: is to have a smaller region appeal, find savings through removing all duplication, but make sure we hit it out of the park in the areas where having pooled resources makes sense.
Yeah, and that's great. That's a great way to explain it, Patrick. I really appreciate that. Is there anything else you'd like to share, Cody, or would you like to ask another question?
Well, I guess we could talk about Mississauga, East Cooksville. That's where Bonnie Crombie is running to be the MP, and I'm sure I guess you know that your mother-in-law is running to be for the PC party in that riding.
I want to see family succeed. She's always wanted to run, and so I think she's very excited about this. But she's up against the leader of the Liberal Party, and so leaders generally get a boost in their own ridings, and so I think it's going to be a close race, a competitive race. So it should be one of the ridings to. The fact that Bonnie has to come back regularly to door knocking campaign, I think, speaks to the fact that she's worried about it. You don't see any of the other leaders, Merritt Stiles or Doug Ford, door knocking in their own riding because they're confident they're going to win their ridings. And so there's certainly not a love affair for Bonnie right now in Mississauga. The fact that it looks like best case scenario that the party may win one or two seats, and there are polls suggesting they're not going to win any seats, and so. Normally a leader would have much more of a boost in their hometown when they're presenting themselves as leader of the party. I think if Hazel McCallie never ran provincially, those 5 seats would have been in the bank for whatever party she ran for, because there was a real love for Hazel. Bonnie's time as mayor is much more conflicted in Mississauga.
And I agree with everything that you just said, and I think just as the writ was dropped, it looked like that this riding was heading towards the Liberals. It was like a 1 or 2.338 Canada, and now we have the Ontario PCs at 44% and the Liberals at 40%. And if I were willing to bet, I'm pretty sure that the internal polling numbers is probably even better for her, because 338, they just aggregate everything.
For sure. Speaking about Bonnie potentially likely not winning the premiership, is there any worry, or is there a likelihood that she might come back and run for mayor of Mississauga again?
Yeah, I think the only person who can answer that question would be Bonnie herself. Anything can happen in politics. So Mississauga is certainly an interesting place to follow right now. They just had a very interesting mayor's election that was. I would say there's a lot of us in Peel. Whenever Carolyn decides to retire, I think there's going to be a big draft Nokha campaign. And so if there was ever a race between Nokha and Bonnie, seasoned political pundits would say that Nokha would be the favorite.
I think Patrick believes in me more than I believe in myself, which I always appreciate. Thank you so much, Patrick, for your time.
Okay, my
Really
pleasure.
enjoyed this
Until next time.
Yes, join us again. We would love to have you again, but we really appreciate you taking the time, and thank you for your openness and honesty, and just having this conversation with us.
Yeah, my pleasure.